and welcome to our webinar, Boosting Sales with BABA, Navigating Build America, Buy America Compliance. I have just a quick little bit of housekeeping for you before I pass you off to the main event. We will have time for questions and answers at the end of our presentation. To ask a question, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will be compiling questions throughout the event, so there is no need to hold your questions until the end. You can send them through just as soon as they come up to you. Now, it is my pleasure to pass over to BlueGreen Alliance Foundation President Jason Walsh. I'm going to share my screen. We have some slides for you all, and Jason will start our presentation shortly.
Thank you, Abby. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I hope all of you calling in from within the polar vortex are staying warm and dry. This webinar will provide an in-depth look at the Build America, Buy America Act, which we will affectionately refer to as BABA. The webinar will cover a range of topics: how a manufacturer demonstrates that their products are BABA compliant, what kind of market opportunity BABA represents for U.S. manufacturers, what types of products do and do not require BABA compliance, what types of products are and are not covered under BABA, and what tools are available for helping advertise products that are BABA compliant. If you are here to learn about any or all of these topics, you are in the right place. Next slide, please. We have a great lineup of presenters. I am joined by my colleague, Joe Kendrick, who is the lead author of Making BABA Work for American Manufacturers. He's going to walk you through the highlights from that report. We also have Paul Shahriari, founder and Chief Innovation Officer at Ecomedes, our co-sponsor of this webinar, and Tim Nass, Vice President of National Sales at SAFTI First, based in California. We will have plenty of time, hopefully a full half hour, for Q&A and discussion after the presentations, but you don't have to wait. You can submit questions at any point through the Q&A function that you will find at the bottom of your screen. Next slide, please. Let me first give you a little bit of background on the BlueGreen Alliance, if you're not familiar with us. We are a partnership of labor unions and environmental organizations. This is our mission statement. The foundational principle that brings and keeps our partners together is a belief, a really bedrock belief, that we don't have to choose between good jobs and a clean environment, that we can and must have both. Next slide, please. BGA was founded by the United Steelworkers Union, the Sierra Club, almost 20 years ago. We now include 14 national labor and environmental organizations who collectively represent roughly 15 million members. Next slide. BGA is first and foremost a public policy organization. We work at the federal level and in a number of states on policies at the intersection of climate, clean energy, manufacturing, buildings, jobs, community and worker health and safety, and a whole lot more. Part of our DNA is a conviction that unionized jobs in manufacturing are one of the essential ways for working class people in this country to secure a decent life. We have championed policies to strengthen American manufacturing since our inception, and did a whole lot of work with many others to pass a bunch of laws during the Biden-Harris administration that have contributed to a revival in domestic manufacturing, particularly in clean technology sectors that will be central to economic competitiveness and growth in a increasingly carbon-constrained global economy. Next slide. One of those laws was the bipartisan infrastructure law passed by Congress as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in 2021 and signed by President Biden, and which included the Build America, Buy America Act. At BGA, for a little bit of background, we have always believed that U.S. taxpayer dollars should be used to purchase, that are used to purchase manufactured products. When that happens, American-made products should be at the front of the line. But until BABA was passed, the vast majority of federally financed procurement, and by that I mean procurement not done directly by the federal government, but using federal dollars, typically in the form of grants and loans, sometimes referred to as federal financial assistance. This was not covered. This was not subject to Buy America requirements until BABA closed that gap, which covers literally hundreds of billions of dollars worth of procurement. Next slide, please. So just to be abundantly clear about it, we believe that BABA is a critical tool for aligning the goals of accelerating the deployment of clean technologies and boosting U.S. manufacturing and jobs for American workers. Many key and large Bill and Inflation Reduction Act programs designed to deploy clean technologies at an unprecedented scale and pace are subject to BABA requirements. Next slide. BGA also focuses on sustainable building products. Our buildingclean.org website features search tools to identify energy efficient and healthier building products and find manufacturers who are making these products in the US. Our database includes over 4,000 US manufacturing locations, searchable by a bunch of different attributes, including product sector, CSI, state and zip code, which enables local and regional sourcing and highlights good quality manufacturing jobs in communities across the US. We're now using that database to better understand which companies make products that are BABA compliant and provide access to that information on our product search tool. Next slide, please. That search tool was created and is supported by our co-sponsor collaborator Ecomedes, which is a leader in sustainable procurement. You'll hear more from Paul here in a moment. And it's how we provide users of our website access to thousands of building products with certifications and transparency information related to sustainability, chemicals, and health. Our partnership has brought together their Ecomedes product data with our manufacturer data as part of what I think has been a really fruitful collective effort to build the tools needed to solve challenges in procuring US manufactured goods. To take a step back for a moment and just to be abundantly clear about what we view as the stakes here and why we're doing all this. We believe that the combination of BABA as a policy tool and historic levels of public investment in the clean economy provides us with really an enormous opportunity to create markets for US manufacturers of clean technologies and sustainable building products so that they can scale and innovate and compete in some of the most important technologies and building product categories in the global economy of today, of tomorrow, of 5 years from now, and 2 decades from now. Right? We think this is a very big deal. That's why we're here. Next slide, please. Since BABA was signed into law, we have heard from a variety of different stakeholders about their excitement about BABA, but also, candidly, some of the challenges they've encountered in implementing and complying with it, including some key Bill and IRA programs. So toward that end, over the past several months, BGA has engaged with stakeholders, formulate best practices for waivers, engaged with the federal government around waiver best practices, worked with key partners like GSA, the General Services Administration, and Ecomedes to develop tools that I've just described. And we've engaged with manufacturers like we are doing with this webinar. And on that note, I'm going to turn the mic over to Joe Kendrick. Joe, take it away.
Thanks, Jason. So my name's Joe Kendrick. I'm a research and policy analyst here at the BlueGreen Alliance. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of how the BABA law works and what it means specifically for US manufacturers. Everything I'm going to be talking about today is covered in more detail in our recently released user guide, Making BABA Work for American Manufacturers. Next slide, please. So the first question you might be asking is why American manufacturers should even care about BABA. As Jason mentioned, there have been Buy America policies and Buy America preferences in law before, But BABA has really dramatically expanded the scope and scale of these, both in terms of the types of projects that are covered by a Buy America preference and the types of products that are covered by these Buy America preferences. BABA was signed into law as part of the as part of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which was closely followed by the Inflation Reduction Act. And these two policies together invested over $700 billion in spending that is covered by BABA. And this money, in the majority of it, has been awarded and obligated to different developers of infrastructure projects and will be spent over the next several years, meaning that those developers will be looking for BABA compliant products as they build out their projects. BABA doesn't just apply to Bill and IRA, however. It's an indefinite permanent law that's going to apply to all infrastructure spending moving forward, approximately $100 billion a year. So this is a lot of money. Next slide, please. So what does the law say exactly? The key sentence is that each federal agency shall ensure that none of the funds made available for a federal financial assistance program for infrastructure may be obligated for a project unless all of the iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials used in the project are produced in the United States. So, in short, federally subsidized infrastructure projects need to use American-made materials and products. The exact contours of what is and isn't covered, however, depends on how these key terms are defined, both in law, by the Office of Management and Budget, and by the federal agencies who are implementing this law. Next slide, please. So in terms of the projects that are covered, BABA says that federal financial assistance for infrastructure is what's at stake here. Federal financial assistance means that the federal government is giving money to a different entity as opposed to spending it directly itself. And the recipient entity in this case could be a state government, a local government, or a nonprofit organization like a university, a school system, or a hospital. Infrastructure is defined very broadly by BABA. It includes what you might sort of conventionally think of as infrastructure, transportation projects like roads, bridges, and public transit, but also things like ports, airports, water infrastructure, all sorts of electricity generation, transmission, and distribution. EV charging is specifically called out. Utilities and broadband are covered. All sorts of different buildings are covered with the exception of private homes. And then in addition to all of these different categories of infrastructure, anything that is publicly owned, publicly operated, or serves a public function can be categorized as infrastructure as well. So this is really a very broad definition, and it means a lot of different construction projects are going to be covered by BABA. Next slide, please. Next question you probably have is what types of products are covered. So the law mentions iron and steel, construction materials, and manufactured products. Each of these has its own specific definition and its own requirements for how a product or material is defined as being produced in the US and thus complying with the law. Next slide, please. So iron and steel in BABA refers both to simple, pure iron and steel products like I-beams or rebar, but also more complicated products that are predominantly made from iron and steel, like a hydrant or a metal door. To qualify as produced in the United States, all manufacturing processes for the metal, from the initial pouring and melting through the final assembly of the product, must take place domestically. The only exception to this is that in most cases, minor components of iron and steel products can be excluded. So if your company makes, say, a steel frame that's made from domestic steel, but the bolts holding the frame together are imported, that will likely still qualify as made in the US under BABA. Next slide, please. Construction materials is a broader category that encompasses a bunch of different materials, everything from non-ferrous metals like aluminum, plastics and polymers, glass, lumber, engineered wood, drywall, coatings, fiber optics, bricks, and various composites. The one thing you'll notice is not on this list is concrete, cement, and other aggregates. These are specifically excluded. And for construction materials, again, all manufacturing processes must take place in the United States. Next slide, please. Manufactured products is probably the broadest and the most complicated category that's included in BABA. A manufactured product is basically anything that's made of multiple materials combined together into something new. So glass is considered a construction material. Lumber is considered a construction material. But if you make a glass window and you put a wood frame around it, that becomes a manufactured product, and it has a different set of requirements. Manufactured products are covered by BABA only when they are permanently affixed to an infrastructure project. So if you imagine an infrastructure project to construct a new local government office building that receives federal funds, the construction materials, iron and steel, are certainly covered. The manufactured products are covered when they're permanently affixed. So things like the windows and the doors of the building, any permanently installed computer, server, or electronic equipment, the HVAC system, the plumbing, things like that would be covered. However, the contents and furnishings of the building won't be covered if they're not permanently affixed. So things like tables, chairs, and the personal portable computer equipment of the workers don't have to comply with BABA. And then to be categorized as made in the US, manufactured products both need to be domestically assembled, and 55% of the total cost for their components has to be from US made components. Next slide, please. So that 55% threshold is key, and this is a table taken from the manufacturer guide that we published, showing a very oversimplified theoretical cost breakdown of a hypothetical HVAC product. And what you'll see here is that in this hypothetical example, the total cost of the domestically purchased and the made in-house components of the product represents 60% of the total cost of all components, including imported components and their shipping and import duties. So this hypothetical product would meet that 55% threshold, and assuming that it was domestically assembled, it would count as made in the US for the purpose of BABA. Next slide, please. So if your company makes products or materials that meet these requirements and comply with BABA, how do you make sure that they get certified as such? The answer is that you need to go through a process of self-certification. And this means that you need to produce documentation, usually just in the form of a simple letter or PDF, that states that the product or material complies. The self-certification document is pretty simple. It just needs to list the manufacturing location, and in the case of a manufactured product, you should indicate that it meets this 55% threshold. But it doesn't need a detailed cost breakdown or any specific information on where different components are sourced from. The self-certification documentation needs to be unique to each project that's using your products. So it's not enough to just post a to whom it may concern letter on your website for anyone to download. You're going to need to put the specific project name for each project that uses your products, sign the letter, and send that along to the project developer. So if you make products that comply with BABA and are used in infrastructure projects, you can proactively list and advertise those, and we'll get into some more details later on how you might do that. But you should also be ready to issue this documentation to developers as they request it. Next slide, please. Here's just an example of what that self-certification letter might look like. This is taken from FEMA's BABA documentation, and as you see, it's pretty short and simple and just requires you to fill in your company information, the project information, the information about the products being supplied, the manufacturing location of final assembly, and a signature. Next slide, please. The other thing you should know about with regard to BABA is waivers. So when BABA was written, it was understood that not every single product that every single infrastructure project is going to need is going to be available domestically. So if a project developer can't find a suitable domestic product, or if using domestic products raises their project's cost by more than 25%, they can request a waiver of BABA. Some number of waivers being requested and approved is to be expected. It doesn't indicate that the law is failing or isn't being followed. What we would like to see is that the waivers be product specific and time limited so that they provide a clear market signal that something is in demand but isn't being made here, and that if a domestic company could start making it, they would get that business. So when a developer requests a waiver, it'll be posted online for comment for 15 days. All waivers will be posted on the websites of the agencies handling the projects, and there's a central directory for waivers available at the madeinamerica.gov website. As a manufacturer, you can keep your eye on these waivers, and if you see a new one get posted, you can treat it a bit like a request for proposal. If you make a product that you think satisfies the need of the project, you can respond directly during the comment period and possibly sell your product to that developer. You can also look at waivers that have already been accepted. And if you see that certain types of products are getting a lot of waivers for them, that's a signal that there is a lot of unmet demand for a domestic version of that product. So if it's something similar to what you already make, or maybe something you've made in the past, that's a signal to you that perhaps you would have a ready customer base if you were to start manufacturing a BABA compliant version of that product. Next slide, please. The final thing that I want to touch on is how BABA compares to prior domestic preference policy. So there are two major categories of prior domestic preference policy, and they are confusingly titled Buy America and Buy American. Buy America, it represents a number of different policies that are very similar to BABA, and in many cases have been superseded by BABA, but were historically narrower in scope. So they would cover things like iron and steel products for water infrastructure funded by the EPA, or rail cars and other transit equipment on certain federally funded transportation projects. Buy American refers specifically to the Buy American Act, which applies to direct federal procurement. So that's the federal government spending money on stuff for its own use, as opposed to BABA, which covers federal financial assistance, where the federal government is giving money to another entity for infrastructure development. And there's a critical difference between BABA and the Buy American Act that you should be aware of in case you're familiar with the Buy American Act. That's that the Buy American Act allows the use of foreign products from US trading partners, whereas BABA does not. Because of this difference, agencies have indicated that they won't accept Buy American Act compliance documentation as compliance documentation for BABA. So if your company makes products that are compliant with the Buy American Act and you have a label or a certification of this, you're still going to need to evaluate whether you meet the requirements of BABA specifically and issue this self-certification documentation that references BABA rather than Buy American. That's all the information I have for you today. If you want more detail on any of this, you can look at our published user guide, which goes into a lot more detail, or feel free to ask questions during the Q&A portion at the end of this call. And now I will pass the mic to Tim Nass of Safety First.
Thank you, Joe. My name is Tim Nass, Vice President of Sales at Safety First. We are North America's only vertically integrated manufacturer of fire-rated glass framing and entrances. To provide context, we're considered a part of Division 8 fenestration, glass and framing. Our products are code-driven, designed to make buildings more robust in the event of a fire, compartmentalizing the fire to mitigate damage, also making it easier to be extinguished, also allowing the building occupants to either seek safe harbor and await rescue, or allow them to evacuate the building in a safe and timely manner. Our market segment is very narrow and code driven. And the history of it is that in the past, most of the products that provided fire protection were in fact opaque. And the Europeans began to introduce products in the 80s and early 90s that were transparent. Our ownership, full disclosure, originally saw some of these products abroad at a trade show and decided to bring them to the US. The US has different testing standards and performance requirements. And as a result, the global manufacturers kind of viewed the US as more of a nuisance than an opportunity. And it became very apparent early on that the partnership wasn't going to meet his expectations. And so he ultimately separated and began to manufacture products here in the US. Like Joe mentioned, there was a need in the market, an opportunity for American manufacturers. And so our ownership took that on. And so now we are the only vertically integrated manufacturer. Abby, next slide, please. So this little video is just kind of a corporate overview for you. We are based in Brisbane, California, not Australia. Brisbane is just outside the city limits of San Francisco. We manufacture in Merced, which is about 2 hours due east of San Jose in California's Central Valley. There we have 3 facilities dedicated to the production of our fire-rated assemblies. We have a facility dedicated to glass manufacturing, highly automated. There are some manual processes that occur there, but it is a highly automated process. We have a facility dedicated to our framing assemblies. So the glass is installed into the frame. And then finally, we have a facility for doors. Entrances are probably the fastest growing subset of our market segment. And while these products are fire rated first and foremost, we have the ability to incorporate other performance features into them. For example, security features, man-made threats like bullet resistance, blast hazard mitigation, attack ratings, natural threats like hurricane impact, seismic, even sound attenuation. As Jason mentioned at the top of the presentation, states have adopted very aggressive thermal codes. When we're on the exterior of the building, we have to be able to ensure that our products are going to perform in lockstep with not only the specification for the project, but also performance according to code locally. Ownership has made significant investments in our manufacturing capabilities. And, it wasn't necessarily in light of the BABA requirements. It was more because we saw that our outside vendors didn't share the same quality standards that we had, didn't share the same sense of urgency. We found them negatively impacting our quality, our lead times, and ultimately our price. And in commercial construction, time is money. So as we began to increase our manufacturing capability and prowess, we reduced our reliance on outside vendors. So that came in the form of facility expansion, automation, things like that to reduce variability and improve our quality. So, we had always positioned ourselves because of the nature of our market segment, and always positioned ourselves proudly as a veteran-owned small business, American-made manufacturer. And it occurred in virtually every one of our marketing materials, whether it was a banner ad, a physical brochure, our website. We proudly displayed the fact that our products were made in the US because it distinguished us from our competition. In the past, we found ourselves involved in projects like a VA hospital or a federal courthouse, which is more of the Buy American Act. But even before the legislation, we found ourselves, with the codes expanding and performance requirements expanding, our products being used in different types of facilities. So today, we find ourselves heavily involved in BABA required projects, transportation facilities like airports, rail stations, terminals at harbors and ports, and then even sanitation, wastewater treatment facilities and the like. And when Dana and Jeff approached us about participating in this program and being involved in this webinar, we jumped at the opportunity because it really is, I think, something that's positive for American manufacturers, and specifically manufacturers that can comply with BABA. Abby, next slide, please. And what brought Dana and Jeff to our door was a video that we produced. This is the brainchild of our VP of Marketing, Diana San Diego. We have a series called Ask Tim, where I address various frequently asked questions specifically for our market segment. But we put this video together in July of 2024, specifically to address the definitions and the differences between Buy American, Buy America, and Build America, Buy America. And since September of 2024, it has, about 30,000 views. It's on various platforms, from our website, YouTube, LinkedIn, but it has been an unbelievable tool for us because, we find not only architects, not only general contractors, but more importantly, our customers, the glazing subcontractor, that really struggles understanding what a requirement is for a specific project. And so we proactively put this video together, and it's had quite an impression, but there's still a lot of work ahead of us. And the user guide that Joe put together has been an excellent resource. In the short time that I've had it, have used it in several instances on project-specific, occasions. So, this database would be incredibly beneficial to any, manufactured product or any manufacturer who is complying with the BABA requirements. The documentation, Abby, if you want to go to the next slide, has been very easy. It's a fluid process for us. So you can see we followed the FEMA standard. We initially came out with to whom it may concern, and so we've had to make adjustments as we go along. But by and large, the self-reporting is fairly simple. Our components are sourced domestically. The manufacturing occurs in our facility in California, so it has not been an issue for us. Finally, complications relative to waivers. I can't cite any specific examples. I have speculation. I know there are instances, these are competitively priced projects. So, you get feedback and you hear a competitor has priced the job incredibly competitive. You start to wonder if they're trying to, take advantage of the cost savings. But again, that's my own paranoia and speculation. I haven't seen anything specific. So for us, it's been great. And I think what BlueGreen Alliance is doing is really useful for all US based manufacturers. So I will hand it off to Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. That was great. My name is Paul Shahriari. I'm the founder and chief innovation officer here at Ecomedes. And what I'm going to share with you today is two platforms. One, sftool.gov, that the federal government runs through the GSA, and also the tool that we built to make it easier for people to follow the rules on sftool.gov for procurement. So if we can go to the next slide. sftool.gov is a GSA-run website, and it has a lot of information. It's probably one of the most comprehensive sources of information on sustainability and high-performance buildings of any entity out there, both public and private sector. On the site, there's a lot of information about how to learn about how to run a sustainable facility, how to plan for renovations and reconditioning efforts in those spaces. You can explore various parts of buildings and systems within buildings to kind of figure out what you might be doing, whether it's a small break room renovation, a couple conference rooms, or an entire ground up building retrofit. The procure section is what we're going to cover today. It's all the procurement rules within the federal government. So they kind of went out and looked at all the different rules. And back then, when it first started, I think it was a bunch of spreadsheets, and EPA had rules, and GOE had rules, and GSA had rules. So there's a lot of information there that they've kind of compiled into one set of kind of federal acquisition rules on sustainability and high performance products. There's some apply. How do you apply it to your work as a federal operator of buildings or a leasee of buildings? And then finally, you can train. Some really good information. If you have the time, please, I recommend poking around a little bit and checking out all those resources. But we're going to cover today is mainly the procure section. So on the next slide, it kind of shows you how when you dive into procure, it opens up what they're calling the green procurement compilation. As I said, it's a compendium of federal, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, there's EPA standards, and what they've broken it out into products and services. So anything that the GSA operates in the PBS, Public Building Service, or FAS, Federal Acquisition Service, they've kind of organized all the rules there. So it's very easy to kind of follow. In appliances, we're going to do this. In building finishes, we're going to do that. In cafeteria supplies, we're supposed to do something else. So on the next slide, as you kind of further kind of go into it, there's 21 total product categories under the procure product side. And this underneath every one of these categories, there's specific rules about specific types of appliances or specific HVAC or specific construction materials and building supplies. So it's a really nice way of organizing what you're trying to buy and what are the environmental sustainability rules for that procurement. And again, most of that is defined by federal acquisition regulations. On the next slide, kind of give you an example of a specific rule. So this one's called flooring. Under flooring, they have, carpet, resilient, and hard surfaces. But under resilient, what they've organized is these rules. So there's some statutory requirements. Again, these are sustainability driven things. SF Tool is about sustainability, but I'll show you the intersection here in a second. The statutory requirements are that you have to have recycled content and, where possible, have USDA biopreferred. So those are the two statutory requirements if you're buying flooring that's resilient. And then underneath that, you'll see required EPA purchasing programs. And that's where they list things like cradle to cradle, green circle, NSF standard 332, TCNA, or the JICA floor covering standards, or floor scores. So that is kind of where you're saying these are the environmental rules, regulations, kind of like we had the great explanation, which was probably the most comprehensive I've ever had on Buy America, Buy American. So that's really good. But these are the sustainability rules. And what we do at Ecomedes is we go out and digitally grab all the data from those registries of sustainability data. At the very top of this page, you'll see a ribbon that's green with binoculars. When a user engages that button, what they do is they get transported over to our tool. So on the next slide, what we do at Ecomedes is we actually go out and gather up all the different sources of data, Energy Star, WaterSense, all those statutory purchasing requirements. We bring in all the data as if you went out there and went looking and pecking at all those rating systems and eco-labels. We take all the EPA purchasing programs that are available digitally. We grab all of that data on a monthly basis. And then we look at manufacturer enrichment of products, which are these first-party claims we're gonna get into right now. Is we can bring in the location of manufacturer. If you do have filled out letters, or you're willing to fill out letters, we can actually put all that information into the database as an enrichment opportunity that sits on top of and in parallel to the environmental purchasing requirements. Because what we found is that it's not impossible to do this work, but if you think about all the clicks it would take and all the scavenger hunting for the data, and then bring it all back to the product or the project procurement level, it's hours, if not weeks, of time to do this on a given project, an interiors project or a commercial project. You might have 1,000 ingredients that are unique. Gathering up all this data in my old days as a consultant used to take us weeks, and we would do it over and over again because project designs kind of constantly shift and ebb and flow. So SF Tool Product Search with those binoculars launches you right into products that have been already automatically vetted for that compliance. So on the next slide, what we'll show you is that we are working for both the back end of sftool.gov, and we're working on the back end with Building Clean. And what we're doing now under transparencies and disclosures towards the bottom is we're adding the Buy America Act compliance data that we're getting from Building Clean and the work that they do. We're also bringing in Made in America. And underlying most of our client data is also that zip code of manufacturer. There's green reasons why we calculate that for distance to project and manufacturing. But what we're doing is we're trying to expand that so that your hard-earned data in the Buy America, Buy American Act compliant product catalogs, we can actually add that and put it in alignment with all the sustainable performance data, because some of the IRA and other funding that we have, both at the federal level, state level, and even private sector buyers, they actually are asking for this information in concert. You don't want to make it necessarily a separate scavenger hunt. So at Ecomedes, we bring in the largest curated database of compliant products. We're really excited this year to kind of in earnest go out and ask for more of the location of manufacture, really support the new administration and their goals to kind of reshore and bring back a lot of U.S. manufacture or create preference for U.S. made products and goods. So here's kind of a summary. 21 categories are covered, 100 subcategories, 5,000 or so brands are in our system at any given time, over 300,000 products. And those 25 certifications, specifications, standards, and eco-labels are updated monthly. We will also be doing that same level of updating with our partnership with Building Clean. So on the next slide, it'll show you how that filter will behave. If someone were to click on the disclosures and transparency, we'll automatically pull in that product data and allow it to be aligned with product category searches, brand searches, and showcase that not only was it made in America with the compliance we talked about already, but also has the environmental preference. So we can kind of hit two birds with one stone, although that's a bad analogy. So we're kind of checking two boxes with one pen. That would be a better analogy to use. But the idea is every time we do a filter on our system, you can actually see within the parentheses how much underlying data there is for you to pick from. So you don't have to worry about kind of being kept out of a project bid. You'll have more than one bidder that meets these environmental guidelines, and hopefully you guys can be some of the first that meet the guidance for Made in America or Made American Act compliant. And on the last slide is kind of our open view of that. When you click on those things, they're going to have a little modal that'll pop up. It'll explain more about the Buy America Act. We'll also have a hyperlink back to Building Clean if you are already working with them, which I highly suggest you do. Put that data there. They have a real wealth of information on that site, and all that will start flowing into SF Tool as more of that requirement is unlocked. And right now we have over 1,700 products in building finishes and 116 in construction materials. We're hoping that that number grows constantly, and all it takes is a little bit of data enrichment on the manufacturer side. So on the next slide, it just kind of covers what we're willing to bring in and enrich that data. So if you have those Buy America Act compliant letters that you're willing to fill out for a buyer, be happy to signify that and make that a searchable term on top of SF Tool. Made in America. If you're willing to give us manufacturing locations and zip codes, we can do any zip code or postal code in Canada. We're doing a similar platform for the Canadian government, and they have some of the same designations. It's obviously called something else, but we have a portal called canada.ecomedes.com that's doing a similar rollout like SF Tool for their country. And you can do that data ingestion on Building Clean. They're a great partner. You could do it directly with us. And we'll also be holding some monthly informational sessions on how SF Tool works. So if you ever want to join any of those, please send me an email. I'll be happy to put you on that distribution list and tell you more about it. If you want to go check if your brand's already on SF Tool, you just type your brand name into the upper part of the search bar, and it'll actually tell you all the products that we already have through any of the eco labels that are already listed. So many manufacturers already have something on there. We could just enrich that data with things like pictures and other opportunity information. I think next slide. So in savings, we try to make sustainable procurement and now hopefully Made in America procurement easier and faster for all people involved. We want everyone to work faster. The buyer needs to work faster because there's a lot of extra paperwork they're having to kind of shuffle. We don't want the easiest path to resistance to be a letter that gets them out of that work. I think there's plenty of information out there. We just got to organize it easier. And then compliance methodology for both buyer and supplier is simplified and streamlined. So it makes searching for products that meet these guidelines easier, analyzing that product against one another, comparisons, things like that. It's all organized in a simple workflow, one button documentation. So we're going to have in the future probably a way to document not only federal guidelines were met, EPA recommendations were met, certain FARs were met, but we'll probably have in the future kind of a section on BABA or however the GSA wants to enroll it. So anything that's in that project order form will automatically take all those documents and roll it up into one section that'll show how many dollars of this procurement was spent environmentally, preferably, and also from a manufacturing standpoint, and eventually maybe the stuff that we've talked about on this call. So, and then sharing those impact reports with other project team members. We do some work with the Department of Energy, and all the activity on their site at Sandia National Labs rolls up to the head of procurement. So at the end of the year, at the end of the quarter, they know how much money they've spent, but also in what bucket have they kind of checked off the right boxes without any extra effort. So kind of getting ourselves out of spreadsheets and scavenger hunts and then more into something that's a little easier to work on and deploy. So thank you guys for the time. I appreciate it. I look forward to the Q&A. And you can just email me at paul@ecomedes.com if you have any questions directly for Ecomedes. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Joe. All very good and information-rich presentations. As a reminder, you can submit questions through the Q&A function. We've already got a bunch of them, which I'm going to cull through, try to answer the easiest ones first myself, and then pass to my colleagues. There was a question about where to find the user guide. You'll see Abby put a link in there. Let me tick off a few here. Does a company need to be unionized to be BABA compliant? The answer is no. Does the Trump freeze of Biden investments stop BABA? The answer is no. Stopping BABA would require an act of Congress. BABA was authorized by a supermajority in the U.S. Senate. It has strong bipartisan support, and we've seen no indication from the new administration that they would be unsupportive. This question, though, I think refers to an executive order issued by President Trump earlier this week that directs federal agencies to pause on disbursement of funds. So emphasis on the word pause. There seems to be a lot of confusion about what the president can and can't do here. But just to be clear to folks on this webinar, no president has the authority to cancel or redirect funding appropriated by Congress, full stop. The Constitution very clearly gives Congress the power of the purse. Supreme Court, Department of Justice, Government Accountability Office have all agreed on this point. So if this pause leads to something more than that, which we hope it will not, it will be, I think, quickly ruled unconstitutional. But it would also mean that the U.S. government is reneging on legally binding contracts and agreements. And it would create a situation where general counsels at all of our major infrastructure agencies that invest in infrastructure investments would spend much of the next 4 years responding to breach of contract litigation, which I suspect they will not want to do. But that decision is not in our hands. Moving on to some of the other questions, let me bump them to my colleagues here. Paul, do you want to handle there's a string of questions here. Do you have to be a government purchasing person to use SF tool? Where will the union made information show up? Two questions. Has Ecomedes added a BABA compliance? Made in America is an FTC specific claim not related to BABA. Oh, how do you join or participate in the BlueGreen Alliance? I guess that's mine to answer. I can come back to that later. But Paul, do you want to field this
Yeah,
question?
so SF tool on all Ecomedes platforms are open for anyone to use. So you can just create an account on there like you would on any of our other platforms, but it's free and open for anyone to use. Half the users are actually the sellers to the federal government. The other half are the buyers at the federal government. So it's a completely open platform. That's a great question. We do have BABA compliant data on SF tool currently. If you're a client of Ecomedes, many of them have been giving us manufacturing location data for a long time for green standards. Now, a lot of them are kind of breaking out the various examples by America, by American, location manufacturer. You can have as many of those disclosures as you want, usually linking back to their website to get an actual letter created, because as we saw it can't be a to whom it may concern. It's more of a specific, these are the 12 products, and this is the distinction between these products that maybe are or maybe aren't. And then the clients are responsible for making sure they meet the FTC guidelines based on any first party claim they make. It's usually in the disclosure section of our platform. It doesn't ever live in the eco labels or certification section, because those are coming directly from folks like Energy Star and Cradle to Cradle. And then you can participate either with Building Clean, which are deep experts on all things related to this topic, including things like union labor. But we have the backbone of the buildingclean.ecomedes.com site that has all this BABA stuff, but also union labor as a filter as well. So I would consider them as the best expert. But if you have the data with them, that data usually flows into our platforms as well. I think that was all mine.
Thank you, Paul. And maybe let me ask my colleagues, maybe put a link in the chat that links directly to where the union made information shows up, just as an example. That might be helpful to folks. Tim, how does Safety First promote that you are BABA compliant? You talked about this a little bit in your presentation, but do you want to expand on anything you said there?
Sure. We certainly promote the fact that we're USA made, and we do that, shamelessly on our website. Almost all of our marketing literature says that. We haven't, put out a specific outside of the video that we put out. We haven't published anything specifically that says BABA compliant. But when we're involved in those types of projects, Jason, then we, literally flood, all of the stakeholders with information supporting the fact that we are BABA compliant. And what's interesting about that is, again, this is anecdotal, but it's typically disregarded on the front end. And then once the buy decision is being made, that's when it comes back and they say, hey, by the way, do you meet these standards? And we say, well, we've given you all this information, but yes. So right now it's, as it relates to BABA outside of the video, it's more project to project related. But I would imagine we'll get, more specific marketing literature for that specifically.
Being shameless for a good cause is okay in our book. Okay, more questions. I'm kind of jumping around here. Will this presentation be available offline? Yes, it's being recorded. We will, I think, any of my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, send around a link to the recording after this webinar. There's a roster list of attendees available. Typically, we don't share that just to respect people's privacy. I think if you have a specific question, there's one here about wanting to see if colleagues join. Maybe I would suggest you reach out to Dana Saylor on our team. And Dana, maybe you can just put your email address in the chat and we can do our best to answer your specific questions, if that makes sense. Okay. Let me get into some more specific questions here. Joe, I'm going to bump to you for a couple of these. Is there a website where we can find where the waivers are being applied or accepted? No single website that I'm aware of. I think, though, our user guide has live links to each of the agency websites. But Joe, do you want to either correct me or confirm that?
The central repository of this is the Made in America office's website, so that's madeinamerica.gov. I don't believe that every waiver that's requested or approved is posted there at this time, although I think that is planned for the future, so it's possible if they've implemented it since I've last looked. But they have a handy directory of where of each agency's website that has their own waivers posted to it. So possibly requires a bit of legwork on your part if you want to be tracking all of these waivers. But it's not that many agencies that are responsible for this, the bulk of this funding. So it's not too difficult to do. And I think the plan is for them to eventually be all gathered on the madeinamerica.gov website.
Thanks, Joe. Maybe in our follow-up email, we can provide a link to that, just so people have it handy and don't have to find it themselves. All right. Stay with me, Joe. I've got very detailed questions for you. Is seating covered by BABA?
Most likely not. So as I mentioned, manufactured products are covered only if they're permanently affixed to the infrastructure. So something like an office chair or a couch would not be covered by BABA. But if it's something like a school auditorium that has fixed seating, that most likely would be covered.
Another question. We are a lighting manufacturer. If we purchase aluminum extrusions, plastic extrusions, aluminum die castings, etc., do the raw materials for these need to be sourced from the US for us to count them as US made components in our BOM?
So if your products count as manufactured products, this 55% threshold is just based on going essentially one step back in the supply chain. So if there's a metal component and you buy that component from a US manufacturer who makes it, who shapes it or extrudes it, then that counts as a domestic product. It doesn't matter where the metal in that component comes from. The exception to this would be if you are manufacturing something that's classified as an iron and steel product, meaning that the majority of the cost of the product is the cost of the metal in that product, then the iron and steel has to be domestic. But for a lighting manufacturer, I don't think that would be the case.
I think you answered most of this next series of questions just now, but I'm going to read it to you because I want to make sure I'm not leaving anything out. For manufactured products, how deep in the supply chain do we have to go for purchased components? For example, if we're buying an aluminum extrusion or raw lumber to go into a manufactured component, does purchasing it from a domestic manufacturer who's assembling the US meet the requirements, or do we need to validate the sourcing of the raw materials?
You don't need to validate the sourcing of the raw materials if it's a manufactured product. So in the case of an aluminum extrusion, the extruder has to be domestic, but the source of the metal doesn't matter. In the case of lumber, if it were literally raw lumber that you were buying from a forester, I guess, that forester would have to be domestic. But if the lumber goes through any processing, goes through a sawmill or something, then it would have to come from a domestic sawmill, but it wouldn't matter where the trees were actually felled.
Another similar question. If we are a US manufacturer, do sub-assemblies done in-house use the labor costs up until final assembly as part of the 55% calculation? And when is it scheduled to jump up to 65% and 75%?
The jump up to 65% and 75%, I believe, is the Buy American Act, not BABA, unless I'm mixing those two up in my mind. But I'm pretty sure BABA is fixed at 55% by statute. In terms of in-house manufactured components of products, those do count towards this domestic cost basis, and any costs associated with the manufacture of those products, so labor cost, material costs, shipping costs, all count as part of the cost basis. The only thing that wouldn't count as part of the cost basis would be any profit margin. You're not allowed to claim a profit margin on your own subcomponents that you're putting into your final components. The labor costs associated with final assembly, however, don't count towards the domestic components. The 55% threshold is assessed at the level of components and doesn't account for assembly at all.
What I hope is one more very detailed question for you, Paul, Joe, but before switching over to Paul and Tim. As a light gauge metal manufacturing company that only sells through distro, we have received letters from our suppliers stating that they are BABA compliant. Should those letters be made available to our customers? Do you or does anyone have an answer to that question?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question. I think the different agencies have different requirements in terms of whether the documentation of compliance needs to come directly from the manufacturer or whether it can come from a supplier or an intermediate vendor. I
So
think
to the questioner, if you have a clarifying follow-up, please put it in the Q&A. Joe, I cut you off. I don't know if you wanted to add more there.
Well, I actually think looking at this question in the chat, I think it's maybe asking about the suppliers of components into the finished product. Those don't need it. If you're manufacturing something that's classified as a manufactured product, you are generally not required to have your own documentation from your suppliers. There's a certification process called step certification where you would generate a letter at every step of the manufacturing process. That's typically used for something like iron and steel. So where you'd have a letter of stating that the initial melting takes place in the US, and then you'd have a letter stating that the rolling takes place in the US, and then a letter that states that the finishing takes place in the US. And all three of those letters get submitted to the project developer. This step certification is generally not a requirement, though. I think for most products, and especially more complicated products that involve a lot of subcomponents, it is sufficient to just have one letter from final assembly that says, yes, we make it in the US, and yes, 55% of our components are domestic in origin. But that is going to depend on the specifics of the case.
Yeah, I think that answers the question. Thank you, Joe. Paul, over to you. I use the Ecomedes website to review building materials and find EPDs, and it's a great resource. Can you clarify how the SF tool is different from the Ecomedes products tool?
Sure. The products platform has no curation, so it's all the data that we have. On SF Tool, we've done is basically we only show products on that platform that have been pre-vetted to meet one or more of the EPA or the statutory requirements. So SF Tool has about 400,000 or so products on it at any given moment. Our main tool, products.ecomedes.com, has about 1.2 million products. So you kind of have to be meeting one of those product category rules as defined by one of these federal standards to make their way onto the SF tool, because they don't recognize certain eco labels, they don't recognize certain things. So it's a smaller curated way, similar to walking in a grocery store and saying, I only want non-GMO, vegetarian, fair trade grown ingredients. And some of the things, even in a Whole Foods, would disappear off the shelves. We do that for all kinds of users. So that's how we do that.
Thank you, sir. Tim, are there any particular customer types who are looking for BABA the most?
So in our world, Division 8 fenestration, we deal with stakeholders, architect, general contractor, construction manager, but we sell to glazing subcontractors. So we sell to someone who's going to physically install our product. So that's kind of a difficult question to answer. My own personal experience where we've, raised the issue of BABA compliance, it's been requested of us. It's typically a large union glazing subcontractor. And like I said before, we tend to flood them with, compliance information early on, and it really doesn't register until they're starting to make the acquisition process, the actual purchasing process. But it has not been unique to a specific type of customer. Like I said, most of our products are sold to those who are going to install it eventually.
Thank you, Tim.
Hopefully that answers you.
I think it does. Joe, back to you. I manage a commercial kitchen with manufactured equipment bolted to the ground count is permanently fixed, and its installation of equipment covered if product was made in USA.
I think that the definition of permanently affixed is a little bit fuzzy, and from what I've seen from agency guidance, different agencies are interpreting this differently. So I think the answer is going to be it will depend on the specific agency funding the project, and it also depends on how securely bolted down it is. So I'm sorry, that's a bit of a fuzzy answer. But it's a question that if you're developing a project that has to comply with BABA, you'd want to talk to the program officer at the agency that's responsible for your federal financial assistance. Just having a Made in USA sticker on the product is not sufficient. It needs this specific certification, self-certification documentation, where the manufacturer writes a letter that says, or issues some sort of document that says, this product meets the requirements of BABA for its use in this project.
There is some gray area here with that. That answer just moved firmly into it. But very good question. I think I have asked the main questions here. Let me call the one more time for additional questions. These have been great. While we have this august set of panelists with us. Hold on.
Pardon me?
Paul, did you say something?
Oh, I thought you said ask me a question. I thought you had asked me something. Sorry.
I don't think I did. But feel free to say anything you want. I'm gonna ask for one more call for questions of this group.
Jason, I could just chime in to say it looks like there was a clarification to the earlier question that I maybe didn't understand correctly. It looks like the manufacturer in question is a supplier to other manufacturers who might need to issue the self-certification documentation. So in that case, it's going to depend on whether the final assembler chooses to use a step certification process where they get a document from every step of manufacturing, or whether they choose a final certification documentation. If they go with the final certification, they don't need any letter or documentation from your company. But if they choose a step certification, then they would need that documentation. My interpretation, just from speaking to some people who work at federal agencies under the previous administration at least, is that there's a general preference for the final certification because it's simpler. But for very simple products like maybe iron or steel that only goes through a few different manufacturing steps, step certification might be preferential, in which case having the earlier in the supply chain company issue that letter would be required. So hopefully I got it right.
I think you got it right. Another question came in as you were talking that I'm gonna bump to you again. As a manufacturer, if we buy a component from a US vendor, but they buy it from outside the US, does that work for our 55% US component? If they are a reseller, or do they need to change the part in the US before reselling it to us?
I think they need to change the part in the US before reselling it. I think if they're just buying and reselling, that does not count as a domestically manufactured component. But if they buy a material and then make that into a component, then it becomes domestic by virtue of that additional manufacturing step.
Another question here, where is the union made information? I think maybe the best way to answer what's now a couple of questions is when we send around a follow-up email to folks, maybe team, we can point people to where they can find that kind of information. That's probably the best way to handle that question. Any other questions? Okay, well, I want to thank Tim Nass, Paul Shahriari, Joe Kendrick, Abby Harvey, and all of you for joining us here today. This has been a really rich conversation. This is a really important issue and a policy tool that we think is really important manufacturers to use. So really glad that you're showing up and that you're so engaged. We will be sending a bunch of information after this. You should feel free to distribute the information that we have already sent out far and wide. The whole point of all of this is to get it out to as many folks as possible so that they are fully utilizing BABA to the benefit of what they're making and to the workers making it and to their customers. I think with that, unless there are any closing questions, don't see any here. We will wrap this up. Abby, any housekeeping I should attend to before we end?
No, just a note, as Jason said, we'll be sending around a whole bunch of information. This has been recorded and will live on BGA's YouTube channel. So you're welcome to send it to any other of your colleagues and reference it as needed.
Great. Thank you, Abby. Thanks to my colleagues. Thanks to all of you. Have a good day. Stay warm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.